Congrats on a great conference so far. I think we've had a really interesting and varied bunch of speakers. And in many ways, a lot of what's gone on before, what people have already covered, has set my presentation up nicely because there's a lot of relevance in what people have already been talking about, the fact that Texas is really growing as a state. We heard earlier from Jeff Davis talking about what talking about what TxDOT are doing, and we also heard earlier about what's happening with NCT-COG. So there's a lot of background that's already been covered in terms of what I want to talk about. But let's get it underway. As you'll see from your agendas, that this is listed as Andy Byford, and he wants to bring high-speed rail to Texas. Well, the nature of my job is actually, I'd like to, and me as just a small cog in a very big wheel, it's not just me, we want to bring high-speed rail to the US. And certainly, when I came back to the US after my stint at TfL as commissioner, there were a number of choices. I could have gone to a consultancy. I looked at maybe going back to a transit agency. But this job really intrigued me. One, because this is a national role. It's Amtrak. Two, what could be more American than Amtrak, Americana writ large? But three, and I felt quite strongly about this, this was my opportunity to give back to the US. You've kindly given me a green card, and this is this will be my small contribution, hopefully, to adding to what other people are already doing. It's a big team effort, adding to that push to get high-speed rail into the US. And I really do see, as hopefully will come out through this presentation, this is our golden opportunity. If we're ever going to introduce high-speed rail in the US, now's the time. I think the environment's right. The desire is there. I'm not underplaying the challenges that remain, but now is the golden opportunity if we're going to do this. And I feel that after, there's been various references to, we'll wait for Andy to come on, and Andy's going to talk all about this, and blah, blah, blah. I should issue a spoiler alert, just to set expectations. I'm not about to announce that we're sticking a spade in the ground tomorrow, okay? There's still a long way to go, but exciting times nonetheless. So a bit about Amtrak, first of all. You know all about this. We are America's railroad, and it is my honor and privilege to work for Amtrak. It really is a truly iconic organization, and we span the nation. You know, with the exception of a couple of states, we're present throughout the US. I'm sure many of you are avid Amtrak riders, which I certainly am. It really is a great way to get about, but we know that we need to do more, and not least because of that bottom bullet point there, more demand for service than seats. We are booming. The US is booming. There's a real demand, a latent demand for rail travel at the moment, and on a number of our routes, in particular the Northeast Corridor, we're actually back to more than we were carrying pre-COVID. You know, so there's been lots of talk about 70% ridership, et cetera, on a lot of the transits. Well, we're actually carrying more people now than we were pre-COVID. So, hang on, point at the back. That should change. We've also been employing a lot of people. There you go. So business update, demand is growing. I'm going to say demand is booming, actually. It really is. And so we have to keep up with that changed paradigm, that changed dynamic, which is exactly what we're doing, building upon the obviously good news about the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. We finally are in the unusual position of being reasonably well funded, and I hope that that can continue long into the future. We do have good money, certainly for capital expansion. There's that $22 billion, which has already been appropriated, and a potential to go up to $66 billion, obviously through grant applications. And what are we doing with it? You've already heard about some of this already. We're re-equipping our fleet, buying a new long-distance fleet, upgrading on the Northeast Corridor, building new bridges, dealing with those bottlenecks that have long held the Northeast Corridor back and been impediments to the Northeast Corridor, upgrading our onboard service, recruiting staff. You know, it really is a very, very busy time, to the extent that this is, that's not a typo there, this is now the largest construction program in the country. And that's why this is so important that we undertake these works, because we want to double our ridership by 2040, thank you, 2040. And we also want to reach carbon neutral, net zero, by 2045, as you can see on the slide there. So we're a very ambitious organization. It's no exaggeration to say it's an absolute hive of industry at the moment. Okay, next slide. Seems to be a slight delay here. Okay, so now I want to talk about Texas in particular. And one thing I've learned in this job, I knew Texas was big. I didn't realize it was this big. Texas is huge. So you can see on the left-hand side then, we've overlaid the map of Texas on something which I'm very familiar with, which is the map of Europe. And you can see just how big Texas is. It really is a huge state. And something else I didn't realize until I came into this job was that if Texas was an independent country, it would have something like the 9th largest economy in the world. So this is a serious player. This is a very big market for us, and obviously crucial to the success of the US. And what you see on the right there is a map of Germany, just Germany, and those are just the passenger lines in Germany. Now, obviously, they're very different. Germany is a much more densely populated country in terms of the population spread throughout the country. But look at that network of passenger railways. We do have a lot of railroad in this state, but not that much passenger railroad. And this is an interesting juxtaposition as well. I thought it might be interesting to do some comparisons between a couple of very large cities in Germany and a couple of very large cities in Texas. You can see there with those population stats for Berlin and Hamburg for Germany and Houston and San Antonio for Texas. And they're not that different in size. You know, we're talking sort of in the same kind of ballpark. The travel times are not dissimilar in terms of distance. The distance, 180 to 197 miles. So they're very, very similar in terms of the distance apart. And the travel, the actual travel times are very similar. It's 3 hours. I still seem to be struggling with this. I'm pointing it at the back. There we go. 3 hours drive time. But look at the difference in actual passenger service offered. So very similar cities, very similar size, similar sort of distance apart, but where Berlin and Hamburg are very well served with train service, passenger train service. The train service in the US between Houston and San Antonio, I'm going to say, is woeful. You know, it really is very, very poor, so we need to do something about that. So what are we doing about that? Sticking again with Texas. We heard earlier on about the Texas Triangle. So it's not all about high speed, although that's the top bullet point, and I'll come on to talk about that in a bit more detail in just a second. At Amtrak and with other partners, we are looking at all aspects of the Texas Triangle because we recognize that in order to service that predicted forecast massive increase in population, you know, where we were hearing earlier that the population is going to grow exponentially. We need to be taking action now in order to expand the rail offering, because quite simply, if we do nothing, then the existing roads, which are already clogged, and we heard about the accident record, the roads that are already clogged will become intolerably clogged. And the only option, if you don't expand rail service, will be to keep widening roads. And my prediction is that you would have to just keep doing that. And I don't think anyone here would advocate that as a good idea. So you can see there some of the proposals that we've got. We've got the high speed, which I'll come on to in a moment. We're looking at the Houston-San Antonio corridor, Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston. And as was previously mentioned in the conference, we're also looking to extend some of our other service, like the extension of the Heartland Flyer service up to Newton, Kansas, and also increasing our long-distance service frequency on the daily Sunset Limited. So now let's talk about high-speed rail. And again, a little juxtaposition here. High-speed rail is the absolute norm in many parts of the world, the obvious and glaring exception being the US, and to be fair, Canada and Australia. So there's a few other markets, but the US is the obvious and outstanding candidate. Um, let's talk about, first of all, Japan. Japan's where it all started, 1964, with the legendary bullet train, the Shinkansen, that was introduced in 1964 in time for the Olympics. And at the time, and I've read up some of the history of this, and it's not unique to Japan. The same thing happened in France with the TGV going between Paris and Lyon. At the time, people said, it's a waste of money. It's going to be a boondoggle. No one will use it. It's a white elephant. You know, why are we wasting all this money on this? Sound familiar? Well, if you now look at that map of both Japan, where the Shinkansen has progressively spread across the various islands of Japan to create quite a substantial network throughout those islands. If you then go to Europe, where the French began the rail revolution with the conception of the TGV between Paris and Lyon, progressively, and throughout the rest of Europe, in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, in the UK, we have our own little high-speed section going from Paris to France, going through the Channel Tunnel. Progressively across Europe through Scandinavia, high-speed rail is now the norm, to the extent that very few people now fly between Paris and London. Why would you? Why would you go out to Heathrow Airport, you know, schlep out to Heathrow and then arrive after all of the security and taxiing and takeoff and flying and landing and taxiing and getting off at the gate and then going to Charles de Gaulle? Why would you do that when instead you can go on the tube to St. Pancras and then get on a high-speed train, a very high-quality high-speed train, go through the Channel Tunnel and end up downtown in the Gare du Nord? You just wouldn't do it. And in similar fashion, other markets, Paris to Lyon, the French have actually pretty much put a ban on flying on distances of around 4 hours. It's very, very difficult actually to take a plane because you're expected to take the train because the provision is so good. Other things to note on the map is also that China is remarkable. People often say to me, well, one of the reasons that the US doesn't have a big high-speed market is because it's such a big country. Well, China's a big country. Now, I get that they go about things in a slightly different manner, but it is quite remarkable what the Chinese have done from a standing start of no high-speed rail to now that absolute spider's web of high-speed rail corridors across their country. And the same is happening in other places. The other smaller ones you can't really see that well are on the bottom right. That's Saudi Arabia. And then Turkey, there's places in Africa. So it's absolutely the norm. And again, doing that juxtaposition, those maps with the sort of spider's web on it, compare that with the US, which seems to have disappeared. There we go. The US, well, in many ways, that tells its own story. The US, and there you've got Mexico. So let's look at this glass half full. The good news is things are beginning to happen. California is under construction. With all of the various travails that project has had, it is under construction. And when Mercado to Bakersfield opens, and hopefully it will be a real success, I think suddenly some of those controversies will fade away as people realize what high speed can truly offer. You've got Brightline, which we heard about earlier from the administrator. Brightline building their line from Vegas to LA. And they are talking about having that ready for the next Olympics, which if they can pull it off would be remarkable, because that would mean building a mile a day. You've got the existing high-speed corridor that we operate, Amtrak operates, the Acela, and the Northeast Corridor, Boston through to Washington, D.C. And sometimes people point to that, though, and they say, well, hang on a minute, the train keeps slowing down. Well, the reason is, it is a high-speed train, the Acela, and wait till we get the new ones. You saw a picture of that, some imagery of that earlier with the section that my colleague from Alstom did. Wait till you get on those trains. But the problem is it's not true high dedicated infrastructure. The train does have to keep slowing down to go around curves and go through very old tunnels, etc. Now, we're doing something about that, as you heard earlier, again from the administrator. But until and unless we have the match of a dedicated infrastructure with a true high-speed train, you can't get the true benefits. Now, we see high speed as being one of the pieces of the transportation puzzle. And the reason I make this point is we're not saying it's a panacea. We're not saying high speed is the right solution for every corridor. You have to have certain characteristics, and I'll come back to that. You also should have excellent interface with the other parts of the transportation puzzle, namely transit, because you can't just drop people off at the end and not have good onward connections. There's got to be excellent connections at either end. We see it also as part of that broader, healthier option. So typically at our stations now, we're providing bike connections, etc. And conventional rail, it all fits together into a system. So I think we would be wrong, Amtrak, and we're certainly not advocating this, in seeing high speed as the right solution for every corridor. In some cases, we can and we are upgrading the conventional lines. A good example of that being the Lincoln service between Chicago and St. Louis, where we just upgraded the infrastructure to accommodate an increase in speed from 90 to 110 miles per hour. So this is very much part of a puzzle. And I said earlier, though, there's other characteristics that you need to have. So what you're looking to have on a high-speed corridor are two cities of big populations, viable populations, big population centers at either end. 1, 2, maybe 3 stops in between. It depends how long the line is. You certainly don't want to have too many stops, or you undermine the whole purpose of high-speed rail. You want to have a line that's reasonably easy to construct, that has relatively straightforward topography. You're looking for routes which maybe have suboptimal alternatives. You know, maybe a very dangerous and overcrowded interstate, or overcrowded airports with, again, suboptimal alternatives. And if you put together all those characteristics, and then you figure out, well, okay, which route would you build? There's one that really stands out, and that is Dallas to Houston. So there are other corridors that we're looking at, but this one, to me, has all of the key characteristics. So Dallas and Houston, the 4th and 5th largest, fastest growing municipalities, urban municipalities in the US, tick. 240 miles apart, so that's right in that sweet spot of around 200 to 600 miles apart, tick. Suboptimal alternatives, we've been hearing about the accident records on Texas roads. That blew my mind, that there has not been a day since 2000 without a fatality on the roads. But the alternative, as I said earlier, if you don't do something, you're going to be upgrading those roads and you're going to have to keep widening them. So I would put a tick against that. Crowded facilities at the various airports, and airports which could use those slots otherwise to free up gates, planes, and runway slots to provide longer distance, more lucrative services, tick. To me, it is the obvious candidate. There are other city pairs that pass muster, but this one is particularly compelling. So a lot of what we need to do is has already been done. 3 big decisions, the one around what's called the rule of particular applicability, where it's been already passed by the FRA that the technology to be utilized would be the Shinkansen train. The second one being the ultimate use of eminent domain if it has to be used. And I would echo what Chairman Neil said earlier on the video. You only would do that as an absolute last resort, but it's there if you need it. And the third piece of legislation that's already been passed, or the approval that's already been given, is the environmental approval for the project. So a lot is already in the bag, but is this a done deal? No, it's not. We at Amtrak are still evaluating the program, and we're going through what's called Corridor ID. Again, the administrator talked about it earlier. Corridor ID being a series of pieces of planning work that you work your way through, and there's 3 steps. We're currently in the 2nd step. We're heading towards the 3rd step. And the 3rd step is all about environmentals, and the good news is we've done most of those. So what will happen after that? If we can successfully get through Corridor ID, then we would hopefully be successful in what's called a federal-state partnership application for grant funding going forward, and that enables us to then progress the design and take the project that next step further. But again, it's not a done deal yet. We still have some big hurdles to face in this project. We have some political support. We've got strong political support, in fact, in the cities of Dallas and Houston and in the intermediate stop at College. But it's true to say that not everyone is in favor of the project. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Secondly, you have to put together the funding package in order to fund what's never cheap. This would be a multi-billion dollar railway, but I would argue that it makes huge economic sense, which I'll come back to. And thirdly, we have not yet got the whole of the right-of-way. Some of the right-of-way, some of the property has been acquired, but there's still quite a lot still to acquire. So a long way to go, but I think the prize is worth it. Why do I say that? Because where one of the first things Amtrak did in taking over the project was to undertake research to see, is the demand still there post-COVID that same research indicated was there pre-COVID. And I have to say, I waited for the outcome on tenterhooks because I had a nasty feeling the business case had collapsed. Actually, the business case is stronger than ever. There is less business demand because of home working, people going on Zoom, but very, very strong leisure market. So our forecast, the actual forecast in terms of the projected ridership is very strong. And that's important because that means that you can then make a business case for the capital investment to raise the funding in the private markets and in the public sector in order to actually then stick a spade in the ground and make this thing a reality. When would it open? If we are successful in putting together that funding package, which will itself take about a year, then we will be looking to open in the early 2030s and get the line open, and that includes testing, commissioning, trial operations, and everything else that you have to do. So watch this space. There's still a lot. There's a lot of big hurdles to overcome. But I really do think that this, if we can pull it off, will be an absolute jewel in Texas's crown. And here's why I say that. And I'm hoping this video will play properly. This is the Shinkansen. So you can see there. This is what's called an N700S. It's the latest Shinkansen technology, and it's the train that we would deploy. There's actually a number of different variants of that's the N700S. Look at that. How can you not be impressed by that? Even the non-train fans, and I suspect we're all train fans in the room, would be impressed with that. And what you would have here, ladies and gents, is a 240-mile journey at 205 miles an hour, with one intermediate stop and sometimes not having an intermediate stop, and that would give you the fastest average train journey in the world. So not the top speed, there are faster trains, but the fastest average journey speed, journey time for the distance and the speed with which that train would go. So I would argue that is a prize worth fighting for, because again, I'm going to end on what's the alternative. If we don't prevail, if the naysayers prevail, if people manage to stop the project, for example, suddenly the funding dries up because of political changes, well, the alternative is then, okay, we'd look at, with Jeff and his team, we'd look at upgrading the conventional route, but you would be foregoing the opportunity to get from Dallas to Houston in 90 minutes. You would be foregoing the opportunity to take 12,500 cars a day off the I-45. You would be foregoing the opportunity to have something which I think would kickstart a rail revolution in the US. Because if we do manage to deploy the Shinkansen to Dallas to Houston, I predict that it will be a real success because of the projected ridership. I predict that it will have a very positive return to the Texas exchequer, to the benefit of all Texans, irrespective of whether or not you actually use the service. I predict it will have hugely beneficial impact upon the environment because of the amount of cars, etc., taken off the road. And I also predict that as soon as one successful high-speed route is deployed, other city mayors and other city pairs will clamor for it. If we deploy that, that will be the jewel in the crown of the state of Texas, and it will be the envy of America. So let's make it a reality. Thank you very much.
Andy, we have time for a question or two. Chris, you've got your microphone there if anyone has their hand up.
David. Oh, okay. Yeah, we are going to do a little scrum next door. So.
Hi, so I know you met with the DOT and Japanese leadership last week. Can you talk about what came of that conversation?
I wasn't actually present, for full transparency, but there's huge interest, not only at the Japanese end, but the US end as well. I did have a meeting with Secretary Buttigieg, the Secretary for Transportation, and he said he himself is personally very committed to this project, that the President himself is very committed to this project. I'm going to say maybe 4 months ago now, the Secretary went to Japan and he rode the Shinkansen. They did a cab ride for him. He was on the front of the train and he came back gushing with the experience that he had had. He could not get over the quality of the experience, the safety of the ride, the reliability of the service, etc. So fast forward to the summit, the recent summit that happened with the Japanese Prime Minister and President Biden. They did discuss it, and you'll see from the communique that was put out on the fact sheet, they welcomed the fact that Amtrak has entered into a non-binding, for now, non-binding arrangement, a framework arrangement with the Japanese to take the project forward. Again, I would stress that that is non-binding. It doesn't mean to say it's a done deal, but what that agreement says is that we've agreed to take the project forward to the next stage. So I was very pleased that we got onto the official communique.
This may be a little early to answer, but I just booked a Vaughn Lane to Houston, and it's going to cost me $240 and take 4 hours. Do you have any idea of the cost?
That's to be determined. Obviously, we've done some modeling in terms of what the cost might be in terms of elasticities in order to do the forecast on the numbers of people that we predict would use the service, but it is a little too early to say. What I can say is obviously you've got to make it competitive with planes and with people driving in their cars, because obviously you want people to use the service. In terms of the journey time, though, I've used that bus. I deliberately rode the last time, maybe the time before I was in Texas, I had to get from Dallas to Houston, so I booked the Vaughn Lane bus. Now, I have to say, it was a very nice service. It's a great vehicle. The service on board was great, but it took forever to get out of Dallas, and then you sort of chug along the I-45 for what seems an interminable period, and then you run into a big traffic jam approaching Houston. Well, contrast that with 90 minutes. In fact, I always say 90 minutes. It's actually just under 90 minutes. To me, again, that's a compelling reason to provide this kind of transformation to the transport offer here in Texas.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. So.
Yeah, I agree that Shinkansen is quite an amazing technology. It's impressive to see, but there are other technologies that exist here in the U.S. and soon more will come. Brightline, California High Speed. So why is Shinkansen taken or chosen as a technology here? Yes,
good question. So various options were looked at, and obviously we are aware of the other alternatives. You've got Alstom, you've got Siemens. And one of the other challenges I didn't mention on the presentation was, in order to bring in Shinkansen, we will have to satisfy the Build America Bureau, the Buy America Bureau, because you would be certainly initially buying a non-American built product. But having said that, we believe that we can make a case for at least 90%, at least 90% American content in terms of labor, resources, and materials, even if you net out the train and the immediate supporting system. So the reason Shinkansen was chosen, and this predated me, but the reason Shinkansen was chosen was because of the characteristics of the train. It's actually quite a lightweight train, which is why it can travel so quickly, because it's built for crash avoidance, not crash worthiness, which might sound like a technical detail, but it's actually quite fundamental. The Japanese philosophy is, well, why would you build it for crash avoidance? The train won't crash. Which sounds like a glib statement. The Shinkansen has a flawless safety record. It has not had one single train-caused fatality in its whole operation since 1964. It's remarkable, and that's because what you're buying is a system. You also buy the catenary, you buy the signaling systems, the key track work, and it has that flawless safety record and a very, very high level of reliability. So for a number of reasons, that was the chosen technology, and that was what was awarded. It was, after some study, was awarded the rule of particular applicability. So that's the assumption we're working with at the moment. Again, I stress, not a done deal yet. Amtrak is inheriting this project, so we are questioning everything, and we're re-looking at everything, but certainly I've ridden the Shinkansen. One little anecdote, I once went from Tokyo to Hakodate, which is on Hokkaido Island, which is the northernmost island. That was a round trip of around 900 miles, round trip. The cumulative delay on my journey was 20 seconds. And knowing the Japanese, someone was in trouble for that. Someone was told, why are you late? It is just remarkable, and that's the kind of quality that we can have here in Texas.
Thank you, Andy.
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, we have to whisk you off now before the cameras, so thank you so much.